Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're going to be talking about Metroid Dread and why it's probably going to go down as the best-selling Metroid game of all time, at least until we see the release for Metroid Prime 4. There are a lot of things pointing towards this game selling better than all previous Metroid games, and we're going to talk about why this is happening, why this seems likely, and what it may mean for the future of the Metroid franchise. To put it simply, if this game does outperform all previous Metroid games as it is looking to do, it will then mean more consistent, more ambitious Metroid games to come moving forward, and that is incredibly exciting. As a longtime Nintendo fan, my favorite franchises have always been Zelda, Mario, and Metroid, and then Xenoblade and Pokemon kind of follow not too far behind. But those three, Zelda, Mario, Metroid, have always been my favorite. Mario and Zelda perform incredibly well all the time, but Metroid has always been quite far behind in the sales department, and as a result, we haven't seen too many Metroid games over the years compared to how many games we see from Mario and Zelda. But now I think it's gonna change, so that's what we're focusing on today. Now before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out, it is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So to get things started, there's a few things I want to clarify. We've already kind of touched on this topic of Metroid Dread becoming the best-selling Metroid game of all time already. It's only been a week and a half and we've definitely talked about it a couple times already in a few different videos. Just last weekend, I put out a video talking about how Metroid Dread is Nintendo's big holiday game. Now I understand. Metroid Dread is coming October 8th. Many people might not consider early October to be the holiday period, therefore Metroid Dread is not a holiday game. And I would also agree that Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is coming out this November, is more likely going to sell far more than Metroid Dread. I don't dispute either of those things. But the point I was trying to make is that if you look at how Nintendo's pushing and marketing Metroid Dread, it is the game that is brand new, unlike Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is an outsourced remake, and it is looking to be the most ambitious, the most exciting, and it's what Nintendo's sort of focusing on right now in terms of pushing and marketing to the world. It's the game that everyone is looking at right now and talking about. It's the trending title. It is the showstopper. So when I was referring to Metroid Dread as Nintendo's big holiday game, that's what it meant it as. The game that is like the big deal of this year. It's the big story of this year from Nintendo. It's not Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. It's not Breath of the Wild 2, which is coming out next year. It's not WarioWare. And those are all lovely things that I'm very excited about. It's Metroid Dread. That's the thing that's out of the ordinary, that's making a surprisingly big deal. So let's talk about some of the news here that's supporting this notion of Metroid Dread becoming a very strong selling game. So firstly, when the game was announced at E3, Metroid Dread shot up really high in the Amazon bestsellers pre-order page. It was doing incredibly well. There are no other games near it, there were just gift cards. Metroid Dread was at the top of the Amazon bestsellers. Have we ever been able to say that about Metroid? I can't think of a time in a very long time, and that is very, very promising. Keep in mind, this is E3 time. There were all sorts of games that people could have been pre-ordering and talking about. But what was at the very top, or near the top? Metroid Dread, and no other game was quite as close. I feel like that says a lot about how exciting this game is. And it kind of goes back to my point about it being the showstopper for the holidays, even if October 8th isn't the holidays, but it's close. But it's seeming like it's going beyond just some strong pre-order sales here. The hype and excitement going to Metroid Dread seems to be reviving the series as a whole, because we are seeing a lot of interest in Metroid Dread. Sure, it's trending on Twitter and things of that nature, but we're actually seeing people going back to older systems and playing previous Metroid games. Recently, @PegsForBen on Twitter pointed out that both Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion are the first and second best-selling games on the Wii U eShop. Not best-selling Metroid games, best-selling games, period. So people are going back to their dusty old Wii U's and downloading these old Metroid games so they can play them. There is an excitement here for Metroid that we haven't seen really ever. And actually, in Game Explain's video, Joey Ferris pointed out that the fourth best-selling is Metroid Prime Trilogy. So it's not just excitement for the 2D Metroids, but Metroid as a whole, and this bodes really, really well for the franchise. All signs are pointing towards Metroid getting a tremendous revival here, which sort of brings me back to how Nintendo's presenting this game. So during the Direct, as we thought, they first brought up Metroid Prime 4, said it's still happening, and we'll just have to wait a little bit longer, which is to be expected, but you know, the fact that they mentioned it was exciting enough. But then they went on to announce Metroid 5, which is Metroid Dread. And that's incredibly exciting because Metroid Dread is actually a project that we heard about years ago. If I remember correctly, it was 2006 where we got some of the initial reports for this project, but then it was supposedly canceled. And then, according to Yoshio Sakamoto, they tried again, and it was canceled again or pushed off until now into the future, where Nintendo can partner with Mercury Steam, who did a great job with Samus Returns on the Nintendo 3DS, and together they are putting together Metroid Dread. So this vaporware game, this mythical name of a Metroid title, has come to a reality, and the impact of Dread actually being real, I think, is going over really well with the fan base, and that excitement is spreading to a whole bunch of new potential fans, hence why we're seeing such great pre-order sales and a whole bunch of older games gaining a lot of stronger sales all of a sudden on older Nintendo systems. All of this is pointing towards Metroid doing really, really well. It's doing well now all of a sudden just because Metroid Dread is on the way. But going back to how Nintendo is presenting it, Yoshio Sakamoto comes out at the beginning of the Treehouse, and they have a bit of a developer diary where they talk about the history of Metroid. They tell the world about Metroid. So many people who were potentially not even alive back when Metroid Fusion came out, they're telling everyone about this history. They're talking about the development of this game, and then they open up the Treehouse with an awesome Treehouse segment. But the interesting thing is that they also close out the Treehouse with another Metroid Dread segment. There was only one game that got two Treehouse segments for Nintendo's E3 in their short little 3-hour window, and that was Metroid Dread. They got it twice, the opening act and the closing act. And I think that says a lot about what Nintendo plans for Metroid. Nintendo's finally giving Metroid the push that it needs, and if we're looking at all the numbers we're seeing so far, all the reports we're seeing so far, it's all boding really, really well for not just this game, but the franchise as a whole. But it's not just with how much Nintendo is talking about Metroid Dread and the way they're presenting it, it's with the game itself. Yes, there's a bit of this narrative going around that it's just a 2D game, it's not that big of a deal, maybe it shouldn't even be $60. Honestly, I think that's a bit of a shallow perspective here, because just because a lot of the perspective is in 2D, that doesn't necessarily take away from the quality of the game. But on the note of the perspective, what we're seeing with Metroid Dread I think is actually quite ambitious, because yes, it is following the traditional style of gameplay as your typical Metroid game. As it should, because the term Metroidvania came from Metroid. But Metroid Dread also seems to be an evolution of that gameplay, because we're seeing them do quite a lot here. So as we're exploring this environment, the environments are rendered in 3D, and there are moments where we see a lot of perspective shifts. We've seen in some cutscenes where they still show Samus in first person, which I do think is meant to pay homage to the Metroid Prime series. But then also there's a lot of dynamic and fluid transitions into cutscenes that show some really cool perspectives behind the shoulder, circling about, where Samus is doing all these different cool things and interacting in these 3D rendered environments. But it's not just for the cutscenes and the presentation, but I do believe this will also impact gameplay as well. Early on in the Treehouse, we did see that Samus can get this power-up that is called the Omega Cannon, which actually allows Samus to pull the camera behind her shoulder, and she can aim down and shoot something down with tremendous power. So we are seeing a little bit with Metroid Dread that they are blurring the lines a bit between 2D and 3D. But going beyond these dynamic camera perspective shifts, we're also seeing something interesting with the dread element here. The Emmys and what they're doing, they visually look amazing, but also the fact that they sort of chase you around creates this sense of dread. A really cool and interesting element. Now, I'm not going to try and argue that this is the first time this has ever been done. We've seen it done in other games. For example, the more recent Resident Evil games. It's a really awesome mechanic, but we're seeing them implement it here in the Metroidvania style of gameplay, and from what we've seen so far, it looks to be working really, really well. But when you factor that in alongside these dynamic camera perspective shifts and the different things Samus can do, and the eerie and atmospheric nature of Metroid, it's all combining into what is looking to be a very powerful experience here. And this is just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface with what this game is going to offer, I think. As Nintendo has said themselves, the Emmy are just the surface level threat here. There is more beyond that. We even see in the trailer what appears to be the first known living Chozo. If you don't know, the Chozo is an ancient alien species that was actually the species that helped to raise and power up Samus, but all throughout all the different Metroid games, they've been more about this ancient civilization that built things up and had incredible technologies, but have all gone extinct. It's always been very mysterious. But now we're seeing for the first time a living one. Potentially. This is all a big deal. Metroid 5 is finally continuing the Metroid story from Metroid Fusion, which was Metroid 4, which came out back in 2002. Nintendo is finally moving forward with Metroid, and as we've noted earlier, this is looking like it's going to carry over to the Metroid Prime series. We're already seeing Metroid Prime Trilogy perform surprisingly well on the Wii U eShop. We are seeing within Metroid Dread itself a lot of first-person perspective moments within the trailers and cutscenes. I believe, as I've said even before this game was shown off, that Nintendo wants Metroid Dread to be a big revival for the series, and they want that momentum to carry over to an eventual release of Prime Trilogy HD and then Prime 4. And all of these games I think are going to do incredibly well. There's going to be very strong sales. They're going to be the best-selling Metroid games in the history of the series. And once all these games come out and do incredibly well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, Nintendo's going to all of a sudden have another franchise that they can rely on to get very strong sales. Like Mario, like Zelda, like Splatoon, like Luigi's Mansion, like Mario Kart, like Smash Brothers, like Animal Crossing. And I want to point something out here. All of those franchises had their best-selling entries on the Nintendo Switch. Which brings me to my final point, the Switch effect. Even excluding all the other things that are boding well for the strong sales of Metroid Dread, you still have the potential boost of the Switch effect. Games in general sell better on Nintendo Switch. A lot of that I just think has to do with the form factor of the Switch, because it's a system that is a hybrid that can be docked, that can be in tabletop mode, that can be portable. It gives people a lot more opportunity to play games in the way they want to, and it's very flexible and fluid, and for that reason people play more games on the Switch than other systems. Thus people buy more games for their Switch because they can actually see themselves playing through. It's more practical than other systems. But with that in mind, and all the other games and franchises that we've seen hit record levels on Nintendo Switch, Metroid seems like a given, especially when we consider everything else we've talked about in this video. How Metroid Dread is arguably one of the most ambitious 2D games we've ever seen, and how it seems to be evolving the franchise, continuing the story, and how we're seeing a lot of strong signs with pre-orders on Amazon and other Metroid games seeing strong sales on systems that aren't being supported anymore. So with all of that in mind, I feel very confident in saying that Metroid Dread is going to go down as the best-selling Metroid game of all time. Which isn't saying much. The best-selling Metroid game was Metroid Prime, and it didn't even hit 3 million. I think Metroid Dread can at least hit 3 million, which would be a pretty good number, and I think it can even go a decent bit beyond that, perhaps. And Prime 4? Well, when that comes out, I'm gonna assume 2023, that will also do really well, and I think probably even better than Metroid Dread. But regardless, I think this all bodes really well for future Metroid games to come, which is great news for not just old Metroid fans, but all of you new Metroid fans as well. But that's what I think. Metroid Dread is going to do really well. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.